Good evening. Welcome to Beyond the Headlines with Bailey Hufstetler. I am your host, Bailey Hufstetler. Very excited that you're here. We've been off for 2 weeks, but we are back in the studio tonight, and we have a very special guest for you that is going to be answering a lot of questions for us tonight. Monty Fritts, who is running for governor of Tennessee. He is joining us virtually from his home in Kingston, Tennessee. So, Monty, thank you for joining us.
Brother, it's good to be with y'all tonight. I appreciate y'all's time. I don't know that I'm a very special guest, but I'm honored to be your guest.
Well, thank you so much. We're very excited to have you on, and thank you for joining us for a little bit here tonight. Just got a bunch of questions just to ask you about your campaign, your platform, your policies, things like that. And but first, we're just going to kick it off with what motivated you to run for governor in the first place?
I'll just give you the quick answer. I feel called of God to do this, to run. That wigs some people out when I say that, Bailey, but I don't really care. One of the great things about being called rather than just wanting to do something is I can be completely straightforward with what I feel about things. And I am, I'm currently a state rep up in House District 32, just north of y'all. I've at Roane County and the north half of Loudoun County. And I was ready to get out of politics, glad to be away from it. And there's an old church phrase of God put a burden on your heart. And I've had that for months and months and months and prayed about it. So last September, August, we finally, I submitted to that and announced I was going to run, and it's been quite a journey.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. So just moving right on into just some basic questions just about your background. So you do have experience. You served in our military. So thank you for that. Thank you for your service. Also nuclear industry, and then also the state legislature. So how have those things prepared you to lead Tennessee?
Well, I would add even a couple things in there other than, I've been in the military twice, really. I joined in 83 and spent up until 93 in either the Texas or Tennessee National Guard. I was in Texas for a little while. And then in 2003, re-enlisted, and I had a convoy security and PSD team in Iraq. I certainly think that even at age 40 and 41, I turned 41 somewhere, in Iraq. And it was a tremendous experience in leading younger men and working with good men and women to get missions done. We did about 270, by what I'm told, 272 combat patrols in Iraq. And I think that's a top leadership that I bring to the table that none of the other candidates certainly do. I worked for the Tennessee Department of Corrections back in the early 80s. And certainly that's an organization that's having its problems today. And I think I understand it a bit better than what most of the folks in politics do, so I'm prepared to lead there. The nuclear manufacturing, I started out as an hourly guy at Y-12. I was a union steward for a couple of years, and, the Lord has a sense of humor, Bailey. And I found myself not liking 7-day rotation. I went back to school, changed jobs. Good people took an interest in me. Before that journey was over, we were managing a budget of about $250 million a year and leading the safety, quality, schedule, and cost operations for chemical synthesis and metal production at Y-12. I led operations at Nuclear Fuels. I have, having been a union steward in my early days, I understand what working men and women think. And I believe that many politicians today are completely out of touch with the average working class Tennessean. So I think I'm much better prepared there. When Trump 45 went in, I was happily in my job as director of operations at Nuclear Fuels. And I received an offer for a direct appointment with the federal government to manage the uranium, tritium, and plutonium material recovery and recycle program. I did that, stood up the Office of Stockpile Production Integration, much larger budget than even the 250 million. So I understand how much the budget impacts what we get done. I learned that, I think, as a federal program manager and managing those large budgets. And so some of the emphasis you hear from me from time to time about getting the budget in order, is because everything's connected to the dollar. And after all, Bailey, they're your dollars.
Mm.
Nashville doesn't have a single dime. They're all yours.
Yeah.
And I think I've demonstrated a fiscal conservatism in the General Assembly and been willing to swing for the fence on some legislation that we've got passed that led the nation, probably in 4 or 5 different categories. And so I think the culmination of all of that, with the fact that I am a Christian heritage born again believer, I think we need more of that in Tennessee. I think we need to honor our Christian heritage. I think many of the issues we have in government and in society are resulting from the fact that we've turned away from our Christian heritage in many regards.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Monty, and thank you for your service to our country. So thank you for that.
Yes, sir.
Throughout your entire campaign so far, you've spoken about liberty and less government. That's one of your big slogans that you've used. It's on your website, and it's a lot of your platform. What does that look like in practical terms for our Tennessee families here?
So it starts with keeping more money in your pocket, in each Tennessee family's pocket, and in Ray County coffers and Roane County coffers. I think we take specific steps early on, things I've attempted to do as a state representative. I intend to follow through with those as governor. I think that we start with removing the 4-cent state grocery sales tax in Tennessee. I think that that puts money in your pocket and in Ray Countyans' pockets, and it takes it away from those folks in Nashville that often just take the money in and then give it back into the counties with conditions on how it can be spent. Secondly, ending the corporate welfare in the state of Tennessee. We should not be using your tax dollars to send Starbucks $30 million to move into Tennessee, nor should we have spent $550 million of your dollars to move the Titans into a new stadium. And we did that before I got into the General Assembly. Is one of the reasons that prompted me to run. So I think then the last thing is we need to be more fiscally accountable in how we expend the taxpayers' money. Everybody knows we have some road issues in the state of Tennessee. I don't think we need to increase that revenue. I think we need to leave the 26 and 27 cent per gallon tax where they are. And I think we need to change the performance measures. I don't think we've done well with that. There's an old maxim that says, tell me how you measure me and I'll tell you what I am. And I think we've messed the measurements up. When we have road projects that are pushing 40 years in duration, we're not managing contracts very well. Secondly, I would offer in liberty and less government, we need to recalibrate the commissioners and the senior leadership in state offices that they work for the people of Tennessee and under the authority of the Constitution. And so I'll touch on just one specific thing there that I think is going to be tremendously game changing. I think that it's important for the commissioners and the governor to have a regular time when their doors open, when the average Tennessean can walk in and talk about what's going well and how we continue it and what's not going well, and look for some ideas on how we improve that. And I want to restore a connectedness to the governor's office, to all Tennesseans, to average Tennesseans, not just the affluent, not just the celebrity, but to every Tennessean.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And now you just mentioned, and this is something that, that you've been on your, I've seen it on your website and you just mentioned it, eliminating the grocery tax. So what do you suggest, or what does that plan for you on how you would replace that revenue once you eliminate that tax?
So I don't think we need to replace the revenue. Oftentimes in the two bills that I've carried, in both cases, they just removed that. And we started with a portion of the groceries in the two bills that we carried, so that it was about a fifth of the total revenue collection, about $150 million per year. Last year's estimate was about $880 million revenue that was generated out of a $60 billion budget. And again, I think when you start to cut into those corporate welfare expenditures, I think we're not going to miss that money if we take a good measured approach in how we remove that taxation from the people of Tennessee. My legislation took it off all WIC items. So, currently, if the federal program of women, infants, and children they don't pay grocery sales tax. And so our grocery stores are already set up. They understand what those items are. It's basic food, cereals, juices, peanut butter, uh, basic things that a family needs to survive. And I want to start by removing the grocery tax on those items for all Tennesseans. This year's estimate was $150 million revenue reduction. And again, I think that just a better expenditure of our state funds, we don't need to replace that. Secondly, I would offer this, Bailey. I think putting that money back in the pockets of Tennesseans is going to generate revenue in other forms. So I think that as those pennies add up and it accounts to be $400 a year or $600 a year, $800 a year for average Tennesseans, I think working moms and dads are going to put that to work, to put that money to use and buy new blue jeans and shoes, and it's going to generate tax revenue. I think older folks are going to use it on groceries and medicine, and it's going to generate revenue. And so I think that whole supply side economics impact of removing a tax, I think there's going to be some benefit felt from that in revenue generation.
Okay, awesome. Moving on to something that's a hot topic here, especially in Ray County, but then also just Tennessee, is education. So I know that you have been very vocal and even opposed the school vouchers, which is something that's been brought up a lot. I know that last week I went to a state forum for the Tennessee State for District 1 with Teresa Congeloso, Adam Lowe, and Dennis Beavers, who's running for that seat, and this topic come up with them as well. And you've seen there's a handful of Republicans that support it, and then there's a handful that don't. You are obviously one that doesn't support that. So why is that? Can you explain that to the voters on your position on that?
Primarily, it's Article 11, Section 12 of the Tennessee Constitution. The second sentence says the General Assembly shall provide for the maintenance, support, and eligibility standards for a system of free public schools. So I don't think we have constitutional permission to expend your tax dollars on private schools. I don't have any ought against those people that are taking the vouchers, but I do intend to end them as governor. I think we're bound by our oath in all three departments or branches of government that if an issue is counter to the Constitution, even if a bill has been passed by that, it's the responsibility to not enforce that until that's fully determined. And I fully intend to do that. I would offer a couple other things. It's what we're doing is fiscally irresponsible. So I was at Ray County High School graduation a couple weeks ago, and if those sophomores or freshmen or juniors or eighth graders or whatever in Ray County school system, if they are selected for one of these freedom scholarships or vouchers and they go to a private school, that $7,300, this year's number, last year's number, goes to that school to support that child. But it also goes to the public school. And so in those cases where a student has left a public school and gone into one of the private schools with a voucher, you're actually paying the state TISA amount twice for that child. That's fiscally irresponsible, and I think it's unsustainable long term. Now, some of that was worked on in the bill that went through this year. Again, I voted against the expansion of the vouchers. If indeed a person thinks something's unconstitutional, they can't go along with it, and so that's what I've stuck with. I'll offer this last thing, and this I don't want to offend any of your viewers, listeners, but there's something fundamentally wrong with reaching into one citizen's pocket and taking out $1 to incentivize a decision of a single other citizen's pocket. Kind of picking the winners and losers, and that's what we're doing with the vouchers. And that's a little close to socialism for me. I'm not a big fan of that.
Gotcha. Awesome. Thank you, sir. Still staying on the topic of education. So I know that the state has made measures over the last maybe year, 2 years even, of trying to combat the issue of teacher shortages. I know that you voted, I think in 2023, you voted for a raise for teachers, things like that. And I know the state is looking at, I know there's a program now where you can actually, individuals who work in the school system can actually go and get their teaching license. And I think the school system pays for it. I may be wrong about that. But so there's been a lot of stuff that's been put in place to kind of combat that. But what is your stance on how you're going to address teacher shortages just across the state in general?
Well, I think certainly even with the pay raise that we voted a couple years ago that gets the starting pay up to 50,000, there is an affordability crisis all across the United States right now, and many of our folks are starting their careers as teachers and firefighters, and soldiers, you name it. Even engineers are having a hard time buying a house, and that's a tough thing. So I think one of the things we've got to do is deal with property tax reform. But I think part of the problem that we have, unfortunately, we allowed people who have never taught in the classroom to lead the Tennessee Department of Education. And Governor Lee allowed those people to input policies and measures, and then even in many cases were demeaning toward the average public school teacher. I think we didn't do a really good job. Even, take the money part out of it. In some of the communications that come out of the Nashville establishment, we weren't kind to the average public school teacher. And I'm not suggesting we should blow any smoke, but what I am suggesting is some of the scoring systems and evaluations, the overuse of standardized testing. I think there's a lot of frustration in some of the, not just the newer teachers, but really our seasoned educators, that Nashville has lost its way and they're not asking the schools how we get better. And I think one of the things that is going to be tremendously important is an engagement with the educator and with the leadership in the local school districts to be able to make them feel like they're part of the team rather than the victim of a Nashville decision. And I think that's been much the case. I'll add one other thing to that. I think something we've done poorly from a state level is design and encourage leadership development within the schools. And I think that there's some things that we need to deal with in the colleges. I don't have any room for the woke DEI Marxist ideologies that often are taught in our colleges and universities, and I intend to deal with that. But I think that we can do some things much better about developing the leadership, developing your assistant principals and your principals or academy leads, and putting in place some systems that not only provide opportunity to become better leaders, but also make that part of the assessment for the overall health of the school in a little bit different way than what we do that now. Because everything rises and falls on leadership. And I think in many cases, we focused on spending 50 or 60 days a year working on standardized tests, and we're not focused enough on developing the skill sets in our educators so that we can be successful for decades.
Right. Well, thank you for that. And I think me and you both agree. Teachers are the lifeline of our community. My wife actually was whenever she started college, she was going to school to be a teacher. And one of the reasons why that she actually changed her major while she was going was because of how the education system is. And she just got turned off from it. And because of the standardized testing and things like that. So I think we both agree that teachers are not as supported as they should be. I know you mentioned, and I looked, you voted, for that raise, and really, and Adam Lowe mentioned this during the Senate forum last week, was really now it's in the hands of the local school board to really, help with that since that's been passed and since that's there for them to do that. So hopefully more will come in your administration if you win this election, and be glad to see and be excited to see what you're going to do with that. So,
well, let me add it because it is fundamentally important for us. I think that first sentence in the Tennessee Constitution, Article 11, Section 12, one prior to the one I mentioned, says we recognize the inherent value of education. You and I recognize that. We recognize not only those fundamentals of reading and writing and math, but we recognize the need to be able to help young people go into careers that are career technical. And I think in some cases some areas we do really well at that. Some areas we do pretty well. We've done lots of investment in our TCAT facilities, but I think there's room for that earlier in high school to at least get that exposure to young people. I think agriculture is our number one industry. I think a heavier emphasis on agriculture early on is important to just know where your clean food comes from, and I think that we have an opportunity for that. The other couple of things I'll mention, I was really encouraged. I was in Gibson County last week, and Speaker Sexton was there, and he said there's a move to push a piece of legislation that will bring the Bible back into schools. Well, that's great. That's apparently coming from D.C. I'm a complete advocate for that. Senator Boland and I had something drafted last year to try to get that pushed through, and just didn't have the votes in either chamber, to be honest with you, which is unfortunate. But I think getting back to including the Bible, I think we should be teaching creation rather than evolution.
Yeah.
It's just, it makes me laugh that we teach one in many cases, and many of the textbooks come to us, and many of the electronic curriculum platforms come with a real press for the evolutionary approach. Well, I'm a creationist. I think we ought to teach that in Tennessee. It's part of our Christian heritage. I think we need to teach that. I was encouraged that Cameron and some of the Republican leadership's thinking about it, so hopefully we'll get to do that together. I also think that it's aside from just the leadership element of change in our education system, I think it's going to be necessary for us to take on a more classical approach, Bailey. I think you and I are using electronics right now, and I'm not anti-electronics, but there's something healthy about a book. Mm-hmm. And I think as we've allowed, again, people who have been influenced by Common Core ideology to replace our classical form of education. And we've picked people who are not from Tennessee, first and foremost, and have no experience in a classroom. And they bring in these corporate ideologies and force them upon the classroom. We can do very well by limiting the exposure to the screen time and encouraging exposure to a book. And I think it is, last thing I'll say about education, one of my priorities is going to be writing. I think it is fundamentally important to be able to read, to collect your thoughts, and then to reduce that to writing, because I think when one writes, what you're really first convincing is yourself in what you believe. And I think that's fundamentally important. And you'll see a push for an emphasis on that from me.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. Moving out of education and going into healthcare, rural hospitals continue to struggle all across Tennessee. What would your administration do to preserve healthcare access in our rural communities?
Well, I think one of the first things that we need to deal with, I talked to a fellow in Sweetwater just yesterday about that. We've allowed regulation and requirement and training to become such a burden on the individual that we're having a hard time with EMTs maintaining our EMT base load. And so that what is often that first interface with healthcare, especially if it's an emergency, comes in that ambulance. And we really got some work to do on that, I think. Again, we have invested in many corporations and in a growth at all cost mentality in Nashville, I think. Yet we have not invested enough in our ability to provide the basic infrastructure that we need to be a healthy society. And usually it goes to the hospital in that question, and I think that's part of it. But I think we've really got to start looking at, do we have the ability to move an emergency patient or an elderly patient from their home or the point of injury to a healthcare facility? And I think you've got to start with that. And I think there's some triage necessary in that. I think from a hospital perspective, I think these certificates of need have been a damning thing in hospitals, I think, because I think that we have allowed the government to pick winners and losers through this certificate of need process. I think that we need to get out of that statewide with our hospitals. There's probably one area of certificate of need that is beneficial now, and it's with the methadone clinics. And I think we need to do something different there, just to maintain the local community's ability to not allow what may be just another addiction to come into the community, if that makes any sense. Yeah. But I think that, pardon me, I think there's some real work to be done in the state level and a national level. When I talk to doctors and healthcare providers, the insurance companies have so much sway in the delivery of healthcare that I've had dozens of doctors say to me, I want to write a prescription or suggest a therapy for a patient, and I have to get the permission of a 30-year-old in a cubicle in Sheboygan to do that knows nothing about healthcare. And I think that's happened because we've allowed so much influence by the insurance companies into healthcare. One of the big reasons that you won't see me take big pharmaceutical money or some of those big PAC monies like that as a candidate is because I think it biases the motive for service. And I know that sounds like that kind of stings when I say that, but I think that they don't write those big checks because the politician is attractive. They write them to have influence. And in many cases, that person who lives up on the mountain above Spring City has a hard time getting an ambulance because the insurance companies have so much sway in the politicians. And I think one of the best things we can do initially about that is confront that matter, talk about it. Most people in politics aren't ready to. I am.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. Mental health and addiction remain major issues across the entire state, but definitely here in Ray County in general. Are there any specific solutions that you would present to help with that?
I think that we have a need for Jesus in Tennessee like we haven't had perhaps in the history of our state. And I'm not trying to bypass it. I'll get to some of the practicals in just a moment. But when I wrote the House Joint Resolution 803 to call Tennessee into a month of prayer and fasting in the month of July, much of it was because of 9,000 children in state's custody, mental illness, lack of facilities, mental illness you see on the streets in our jails. You talk to many of the sheriff's departments that operate our county jails, and they'll suggest that some large number of the inmates probably ought to be in a mental health facility rather than incarcerated just as a criminal. And I think that there's room to open some of the facilities that we had in the past. Hopefully we've learned from some of the errors we made in managing those facilities in the past. I think there's definitely a need for that. And I think offering that opportunity for counseling, I want to get the churches much more engaged in that process, because I think that in many cases, mental health first and foremost is a real thing, and many people deal with it. And whether that is from a brief emotional health issue to something that is enduring and just debilitating, many Tennesseans deal with that. And I think one of the best approaches is to have an availability of someone to talk to, because many people feel so isolated. We're more connected than ever, yet we're more isolated than ever. And I think it's hard to replace that face-to-face, that hug, that handshake, and helping to foster an environment where that starts to move into what has become an age of electronics, I think is an important part of that. And so church engagement, getting God's people engaged off the bench into the fight, I think is tremendously important. I think things that we do with our law enforcement and in my area, I think Ray County and attends these as well, but they do a CIT course from time to time. I was introduced to it by the Oak Ridge Police Department, where we just help better equip our law enforcement officers to deal with the mental illness, which is, by some people's estimates, an order of magnitude different than it was 40 years ago or 50 years ago. And so just learning the skill set to help people help themselves, I think, is also a tremendous part of that.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. One last thing about healthcare, just a question that I have personally. So I professionally work in senior living. So I'm an executive director for a memory care community, and my grandmother had Alzheimer's and dementia. One thing, and I actually helped. So the Silver Alert bill. I don't know if you were in Nashville. You probably were at the time. I actually come up to Nashville and helped lobby for the Silver Alert bill. So probably met you maybe in that process and didn't even realize it. But one thing that, and we see it on TikTok and on the news and everything about law enforcement who don't get proper training with handling individuals who suffer from Alzheimer's and dementia, because a lot of the time, because healthcare is so expensive, a lot of the times those residents or those patients end up having to stay at home and live at home and not get the proper treatment. And so is there something, have you thought about, something your administration can do to provide better training to our law enforcement officers to handle with not just dementia and Alzheimer's, but other mental health conditions as well, but specifically for dementia and Alzheimer's?
Well, I don't know that they do something specific at the mental health facility here in Oak Ridge, but they started that CIT program that I was referring to that Oak Ridge Police Department had introduced me to. I think, I don't know why, but it seems like dementia and Alzheimer's are much more broadly encountered today than they were when I was a little boy, right? Mm. And certainly I learned with my own mother's dementia that how you communicate with the person suffering from the dementia is tremendously important. And it either makes the experience or breaks the experience. Mm-hmm. And I think good training is foundational in all things. I'll mention a sensitive subject while we're on that I think training has failed us on. It's statewide, especially with our state troopers. We had 415, I think, last year, what the news media called sober arrests. Mm. Now, that's really a zero toxicology result. Someone arrested for driving under the influence. And you have to question, if we had that number of cases that there was a zero tox, and when I talk to sheriffs and police chiefs and retired troopers and a whole number of people, oftentimes they said they felt like there was a push to do something that enforce something that the law enforcement officer might not have had the training or the depth of training they needed. So I think it's foundational in everything, because, securing the rights of the people is the first responsibility of all government, including law enforcement. And we have many, many deputies and police officers that every day put their badge on and they, honest to goodness, put their life on the line just to try to help us have a better life. Mm-hmm. And so we owe them our respect for that, but we also owe them our respect in providing the opportunity in the CIT programs, the perhaps additional training, as you mentioned, for those who are suffering from Alzheimer's and dementia. And even when it comes down to this governor's task force field sobriety test, I learned some things as I did some investigation about that. I'd never had a field sobriety test. I don't drink at all now. I don't have a taste for it. They've never been pulled over and administered a field sobriety test. But people who are somewhere on the spectrum have a real difficulty with some of the field sobriety tests. And so part of what I heard from many law enforcement officers is we either need to stop using those parts of the interface, or we need some additional training on how to manage it, because it becomes a problem for that person who may be a little bit on the autism spectrum was working and perfectly capable to go about and drive and everything. But it's training is key.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Well, that pushes us right on into public safety. So that was a good segue there. So just talking a little bit about that. Tennessee has seen, obviously, especially over the past few years. I know last year was a pretty heated, or not this last session, but the session before was a pretty heated discussion over gun rights and public safety. How would your administration balance constitutional rights with community safety?
Yeah, so I think the only balance is shall not be infringed. I think that often people in politics get into this, we have to compromise on shall not be infringed. I think that part of the reason that we have had a criminal rebellion in Memphis, Tennessee, is because people in government there were attempting to infringe upon the law-abiding citizens' right to keep and bear arms. And we developed, in many cases, communities of where predatory criminals felt free to roam. And I think that one of the first things that we do to lower violence and crime is stop infringing on the Second Amendment in the state of Tennessee. And we do that. We have code on the books now. The wording says intent to go armed. And so I've passed some good Second Amendment legislation. We had this one for the last 2 years to try to remove that language and some other things. There's a big lawsuit that come out of this from West Tennessee. A group of people in Gibson County filed a lawsuit on removal of that, or the constitutionality of the intent to go armed. And what it basically does, Bailey, in Tennessee law, you and I as Americans, we feel like we're innocent until proven guilty. That's the basis of American law, right? Jury of our peers, quick right to a speedy trial, et cetera, et cetera. But under Tennessee firearms law, if you're in possession of a firearm, you've committed a crime, and you must provide a defense to that criminality. Well, that's upside down constitutionally. And so I am that person that thinks that we need to remove the criminality from campus carry. There's a large group of young people, young Americans for Liberty at college campuses from ETSU all the way into schools in West Tennessee that come down in support of the firearms legislation I was carrying, because whether it's a 6'4" lineman who's playing college football or a 5'2", 90-pound young lady who has taken her first experience in college, they have a right to defend themselves. And on our college campuses, we're denying that. So I'm that hardliner of absolute on all of our Bill of Rights. And I think it's the greatest leading indicator of how a politician or a public servant views the citizenry. I think that person who holds office, who will compromise on the rights, the Second Amendment rights of a citizen, those creator endowed rights, I think that person views the citizen as less than them. I think we have too many of those people serving in politics today. Now, as far as the rest of that justice supply chain, we spent a lot of time on the Second Amendment. I think that's important. I was out at the DA's conference in Memphis last Friday. And one of the things I heard from some of our district attorneys is the victims aren't getting justice. And we explored that with this conversation. They're not getting justice because as Tennessee grows from 6.9 something million up to whatever we are now, 7.4, 7.5, and we hire more law enforcement officers, we must also make sure that the courtroom part of that is equipped to manage it. And it appears, from my perspective, and based on some of the district attorneys I talked to, that we've allowed a bow wave of justice to form in front of our district attorneys and our public defenders and even the courts. And, our Constitution guarantees a right to a speedy trial. And that's not only for the accused, it is for the accused, but it's also important for the victim or the survivor of the crime. And so if we have these long durations of attempting to prosecute something, justice is diminished, and the victim or survivor Feels like they've been left out of the equation. I think we've got some work to do on that. I think we have, on the scale of the spectrum of God's economy of justice, I'll talk about that for just a second. In God's economy of justice, there is a time when the sentence is complete. Christ demonstrated that on the cross when he said, "It is finished." By the nails he took for us, and he took the burden of our sin, it is finished. His mission to be that perfect sacrificial lamb was finished. That, I think, should apply in civil law. And whether that is capital punishment for some hideous crime, there needs to be a much quicker path to the justice being executed. And I'm not talking about just the taking of the life. But when we have people who have been convicted of capital crime and they spend 25 and 30 years on death row before the sentence is executed, something is wrong with that process. On the one other thing on that end of the spectrum, we've seen nationally, and it's a sensitive topic for folks, but we've seen this nationally, that those well-connected celebrities that may have found themselves on some human trafficking list haven't faced justice. I think that we can't allow that. I think we need to be much harder on those crimes. I carried legislation this past year. We couldn't get it to move, but people who participate in human trafficking, whether it's for the sex trade or for labor, should be eligible for life with no parole or perhaps even the death penalty, I think. I think that those people who commit aggravated rape and use chemicals or drugs or alcohol or whatever to render the person unable to refuse, I think they should suffer life with no parole and perhaps the death penalty. I think that we're not prosecuting some of those crimes hard enough, and I think that's hurting justice. And then I'll go to the other end just quickly. I know it's a long answer, but it's important. I think that we have first-time nonviolent offenders that are convicted and then spend their entire life unable to vote or unable to defend themselves and carrying that burden of being a convicted felon. I think we can do better than that in some areas, Bailey. I think, again, first-time nonviolent offender who behaves themselves while incarcerated. And that's a very important part because our penitentiaries are dangerous places to work. And just up on the mountain from you in Bledsoe County, I talk to many of those people all the time, and it's a tough place to work. And so offering some incentive for those men and women in the women's penitentiaries to, especially those first-time nonviolent offenders, that if they really do the right thing while incarcerated, they finish their time, their court costs, their restitution has been paid, and they have a really good record while incarcerated, we ought to do more to help them to become returning citizens where their rights are granted back to them. And so I think there's some work to do on both ends of that spectrum. Sorry for the long answer, but
No, that's good.
Super important.
Yeah, that's good. Awesome. Thank you, sir. Obviously, faith is something that's very important to you. We can just tell that just by just the way that you're talking tonight. So, and I know that you're going to get it, and you get it now, even in the state legislature. How do you respond to critics who say that faith should play a limited role in government policy?
I think our founders never intended that. I think Almighty God doesn't intend that. And Christ is king, whether those people acknowledge it or not. So we in government don't have the authority. Even as a Christian, as a born-again Christian, I have a responsibility to be light and salt. Some days I do better than that at others, brother. But I don't have the authority before God or civil government, no matter what office I have, to force you to worship Christ. You know, there's coming a day when every knee is going to bow and every tongue is going to confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. That's going to happen. But we are to be light and salt, and we're to take that in any vocation that we work in. This whole, what I would call the lie of separation of church and state, that is founded on that one letter to the Baptist Association that people have intentionally misinterpreted, has really been damaging to America and to our Christian heritage. Our Tennessee Constitution, Article 1, Section 3. Many people say the Tennessee Constitution is the best. You know, Jefferson said that. Said it was the least imperfect. Thomas Jefferson, when we became the 16th state, he said our Constitution was the most Republican in form, not party, but republic, and least imperfect. And so that's quite a compliment coming from Jefferson. But Article 1, Section 3 says all men have a natural and indefeasible right to worship Almighty God, capital A, capital G, within the dictates of their conscience. And so our founders recognized that that's the God of the Bible. And so when I refer to our Christian heritage, again, to the person who's a non-believer or a pagan, I'm not saying they're any less than me, but I'm saying that their ideologies must not pollute our culture. That's the reason I speak so against the allowing Islam to overtake the United States or the state of Tennessee. There are places in the country that it has. And I'm so disappointed in many of the people that hold office today that they're unwilling to say we're not going to allow Islam to overtake America. To me, it's a simple statement. But I had one last thing I'll say. When we did our prayer resolution, there was a group sent me a letter, and they were being really, you can't say Jesus as a public official. And of course, we call out the name of Christ in that prayer resolution. And then they quoted scripture to me as to why I shouldn't do that. Now, these folks were apparently atheists, right? But they quoted scripture, God's word, to me as a reason that I couldn't promote Christ, which I found a little duplicative. It reminded me of a snake in a tree in a garden once before. But
that started all this mess to begin with.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, sir.
Awesome.
It's going to play an absolute foundational role in every decision I make. And I'm human. I'll mess things up from time to time. I'll seek pastoral advice. I think that when we try to adopt a polytheistic worldview, we are doing what the Old Testament refers to as idolatry, because the Lord is very clear. He said, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." And that's not just to Moses. That's to us today.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, sir. If elected, what would be the first executive action or legislative priority that you're going to pursue?
Well, there's a couple things. One is getting a set of standing orders and required readings in place that will go to all the Tennessee staff. There's a whole list of things that will occur in that first week. It is going to be a miracle when we win, so we'll do a lot of giving thanks. But required readings and standing orders for state employees. I don't think we abide by the Constitution well in many cases with our commissioners and some of the things that we do. And so there's going to be a very focused emphasis on understanding the U.S. and Tennessee Constitution and a requirement for a daily required reading. We currently have legislative liaisons assigned that work either for or against legislation as it moves through the General Assembly. That's not a constitutional approach. Those folks will all have another responsibility. I think that it is important to have not only, I mentioned earlier, I think like a People's Day where on a monthly basis, the governor's office is open for folks to come in and spend a couple minutes, with what's going well, what's not. But I think it's also important that the governor's office have a response line, if you will, so that if you call the governor, you should get a reply back from someone in some reasonable amount of time. If you email, you should get a reply. Now, Bailey, you may already have a direct hotline to somebody in the governor's office. I don't know. And some people do, but your average Tennessean doesn't. And we've got to correct that. So many of those folks that are currently working as legislative liaisons, they'll be working on that helpline, because I think restoring that confidence of the average Tennessean that somebody's working for them is tremendously important. Some of the back to firearms law. I will do my very best to stop the appeal, if it's still ongoing, of the Hughes versus Lee lawsuit. And if you're familiar with that, that was where the people in Gibson County filed the suit that the intent to go armed and carry in parks is unconstitutional. a Western District Tennessee Chancery Court ruled that it was actually unconstitutional, and the governor decided to appeal that decision. So we're spending your tax dollars appealing that. I'll do my very best to stop that on day one if I can. Last thing, there's a list. I could talk for an hour about that. Currently, the governor authors legislation and sends it over, and we refer to them as administration bills. I can find nowhere in the Tennessee Constitution that's acceptable. I think the legislature and legislators introduce legislation. The Constitution does say that from time to time the governor can make suggestions about, legislative moves that we need, and I intend to do that. But I won't be filing any administration bills. I'll work with legislators, hear their concerns, express mine, speaker, and the leadership. But I'll leave the writing of the laws up to the legislature. And then again, constitutionally, the governor gets 10 days to either sign into law, not counting Sundays, sign into law, to veto, or to allow the bill to lay on his desk and become law.
Gotcha. Awesome. So this race is obviously, really watch. You've got Marsha Blackburn and John Rose both running with you for the Republican nomination. And I know, looking just at some poll data today, just skimming through, and I really don't put a lot of faith in polls because I don't know what source they come from, and who they, and all these polls that go around. I never get asked. I don't, we see all these polls, somebody's leading in this, somebody's leading in that, especially these statewide offices, but I've never once been asked. So I don't know where they get these numbers from. However, looking at some today, obviously Marsha Blackburn is leading, according to them, by 63%. Is your team seeing those same numbers? And if so, or if not, how are you feeling about that right now? What is your team doing to really, to combat that?
So first, I won't do any polling. I don't have a lot of confidence in it because I think every poll is biased, and I think that often the polls are propagandized. They know who to ask to get the answer they want, depending on the topic, the subject, or who they're going to vote for. And I just think they're greatly skewed. I think occasionally there'll be a survey that's done, and so you'll see Beacon or something the other candidates will put out, straw polls. So I got a call from a person today. I won't mention his name; it'll get him in trouble. But they're going to do an event. They're going to do a straw poll, and he said, they're buying up a bunch of seats. And what they do, and often when you see these straw poll results, Bailey, one of the other candidates, if there are 35 tables in the event, they'll try to buy 35 tables if they can. I've had Republican chairs call me and say, Monty, you've got to buy your table today. I said, I'll get it tomorrow. There won't be any tomorrow. So-and-so's buying them all up. Marsha's buying them all up. John's trying to buy a bunch, whatever. So they play those silly games with the straw polls. I think they play it with some of these. I was on WTN, the Dan Mandis show, one day last week, I think Thursday morning. And I didn't realize that he had done a survey, and he did a survey, and on his listeners that morning, I won the poll. Is that scientific? Probably not. It's the radio listeners to that show, right? There was a young man in West Tennessee 2 months ago that did just a Facebook poll. And he's a VFW member that I've gotten to know, Justin is, and he put one out and had 2,700 people vote. He had it set up. He told me that they could vote one time only. And we won big, bigger than the 63% kind of thing. And everybody said, oh, there's no way that's true. And so I guess some pressure went to my friend Todd Starnes, who has the Mighty 990 in Memphis, and they asked him to do a poll. And so he did one from his radio station. We won it bigger. So does that mean I think this is a slide in victory? Absolutely not, brother. Don't think I'm suggesting that. I'm just offering that the polls kind of say what they say depend on who you ask.
Yeah.
Well, my strategy is to work much harder, to keep putting out the straight message of what I think, challenging both Congressman Rose and Senator Blackburn to a debate. I think the people of Tennessee deserve that. I think it would be well watched. The Super Talk in Nashville offered to do the debate online. Several people have offered. They want no part of it. They just don't seem comfortable taking just candid questions, just to be honest. And I think they're both a little bit concerned about their voting records. So I pay little attention to the polls. We're going to keep working really hard until Election Day. I feel called to do this. If I get 2 votes, it'll be okay in the Fritts house. If I get 1 vote, there might be a little tension in the Fritts house. But I think we're doing much, much better than that. I quite honestly, Bailey, I'll be surprised if we don't win. That's my thought.
Yeah.
And is that based on a poll here or there? It's not. But I see the way the other campaigns are behaving, and I think their polls are telling them something much different than what they're putting out.
Gotcha. We're running out of time here, so I'm just going to ask one last big question for you. And again, I want to thank you for your time tonight and for being on with us. But what do you want your legacy to be as governor? If you win this election, what do you want your legacy to be?
That the average person in Tennessee had a voice in Nashville, somebody that was fighting for them. I hear from time to time these people, especially the career DC politicians, they'll say, well, it's just a vote. You're just voting yes or no. And I hear that a lot from Congressman Rose's campaign, not just John, but people in the campaign. People in Roane County and Loudoun County didn't send me to Nashville just to vote yes or no. They sent me there to fight for them. And there are things that are worth fighting for. There are things to fight about. Doesn't mean we have to be mean when I say fight, but, to stand up for them. So to have the average Tennessean feel like that somebody in Nashville is standing up for the working class, the middle class, the working poor, the wealthy, and I make no difference in them. And I hope to encourage, we see so many people, so few people voting now. I think some of that disengagement is because we elect people who promise to do things that they don't do. And I'd love to see our voter engagement in Tennessee go up, and lots of people picking up petitions and running for office. I'd like to see the election field, the Republican ballot. I'd like to see 7 and 8 candidates running in my county for things, because I think that's healthy. And so I hope that, we can set the example that you can be really straightforward. It doesn't require you to spend $20 million and still do very well in election or win it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, sir, for coming on tonight and for answering just a bunch of just different questions that I know that are important to voters, not just in Tennessee but in Ray County as well. So, thank you for coming on and joining us tonight. And we'll be seeing you around. Do you have any events going on right now here soon that you'd like to invite some of my viewers to?
Sure. I will be. I don't know the next date I'll have to search through a phone to find it in Ray or Bledsoe. We were in Pikeville, in next county over from you just last week. I'll be back in Middle Tennessee, be on government ops committees. I have an event in Murray County tomorrow night down near Columbia. I'm meeting with no, I take that back. It's in Marshall County, and I'm meeting with a veterans group there. They've asked me to come and speak. And so, it's on all my social media. I would invite anybody from Ray County to come out to those. And we look forward. We're trying to set something up when the 18 to 25 crowd and the 65 crowd is welcome. But I just feel like we've kind of silenced the voice of the young people, and we've many of these politicians treat them as if they can only go fetch coffee for them. I want to pick the minds of that 18, 19, and 25-year-old about what's important to them, because I really think many of us older folks have become stagnant and complacent, and I think we need some new blood in politics. So I'm looking forward to that. Don't have a date for it yet, but keep on the social media lookout. We'll be down there.
All right. Well, thank you, Monty, so much again for hopping on and joining us, and I hope you have a good rest of your night, and we thank you for joining.
Thank you, brother.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, moving on to some just updates really quick with different things happening in Rake County really quick. Not going to keep you too long, but wanted to do some updates about the Rake County Executive Debate. Remember, it is happening at Rake County High School on June the 30th. That will be at 7 p.m. That is obviously free to attend, and then it'll also be live streamed on Facebook and also our YouTube channel. So make sure that you tune in for that. There is a post on our Facebook page for you to be able to submit questions for that. It's anonymous, so please make sure that you go on and do that. And you can also, I've had several that have messaged me. I've even had several that have seen me out in town and just said, hey, I want this question. So however you want to do it, you can text me, you can call me, you can submit it on the form, however you want to do that. We actually did, talking about polls, so we did a poll on just our Facebook community. We didn't email it out to anybody or anything like that. We just did our Facebook community just to kind of see, because we've obviously been doing a lot of political discussion here with the debates and then with the candidates that we've interviewed so far. So, and because of the debate coming up, we wanted to see kind of what maybe, the community was thinking about our county executive race. That poll is concluded, and that poll is showing, as of right now, that Adam McCrory is leading that poll with 56% of the vote, with Ron Travis trolling behind him with 35% of the vote, and then Jack Kaufman hanging in there with 8% of the vote. 4 votes have been undecided. And so we've got that, and then also we did one just to kind of see what people were thinking. The Tennessee Senate District 1, that's between Adam Lowe, Teresa Congeloso, and Dennis Beavers. We've got Adam Lowe that's leading that with 74% of the vote. Teresa Congeloso following behind with 20% of the vote, and the Dennis Beavers with 3% of the vote. Again, these polls were just done on Facebook. We are looking at ways that we can do more of a broader poll with our subscribers, and then also just with the voters in Rake County in general. That way that we can get more of a conclusive number when it comes to that. These are just small polls that we've done. They were heavily used. We actually got more results out of both of these polls than we ever have before, so we're very excited about that, but continue to see that in the near future and trying to figure out ways to be able to actually get real data from the actual voters. Again, we're going to encourage you to always go and vote. This election's in August, so please go out and vote. Doesn't matter who you vote for, just as long as you go out and vote and express your exercise your right that so many others in other countries would love to have, to be able to elect your local leaders. And we just you need to exercise that right and go out and vote. Thank you for joining us tonight. I know it was a little long episode tonight, but thank you so much. We'll be back here on Tuesday. We've got some exciting interviews happening for the next month with different candidates that are running for local office. We have Adam McCrory on the docket. We have Adam Lowe. We've got Justice Stout running for county commissioner. We've got several of those candidates that are going to be on for interviews. If you are a candidate and you're wanting to be interviewed by our show, please reach out to me. We also have opportunities for you to be able to have some advertising as well. So if you have that, and if you want to be a part of that, please reach out to us. And any local businesses, we're still looking for advertising partnerships for our county executive debate. Holding these debates are obviously not free, and so we are looking for some advertising partners to be able to help with the cost of the studio equipment that's going to have to go for the live stream, plus renting the facility at the high school, and then we're going to be paying the custodians and stuff there at the high school, since they're that week that we're having it, they're actually supposed to be off that week, but they've graciously allowed us to be able to have it there. And then some of the staff is going to be taking time that they were supposed to have off to be there for this event. So we're going to be showing them some, just thanking them for what they're doing and paying them for that. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate you and everything that you're doing for the Rake County community and the state of Tennessee. So have a good rest of your night, and God bless Rake County, God bless Tennessee, and God bless America.